You should be in one of the boats, Johnny lad. You're only a slip of a boy. You're young enough. You've got the right. The gangway was packed with passengers trying to make their way up on deck, some of them older and more infirm, still in their nightgowns. One of the sailors who was trying to help them tried to stop me going down. You can't go there. There's water coming in everywhere down there. The whole ship's flooding fast. I dodged past him. Idiot, he yelled after me. You blithering idiot. You go down there and you won't come back up again. I ran on. After losing my way in the warren of corridors, I reached the right corridor on deck C, and I knew then that the sailor had been right. The sea water was ankle deep and rising all the time, and once I opened the door to number 52, I saw the carpets were already under water. I looked around me frantically for Kaspar, but couldn't see him anywhere, not at first. It was Kaspar himself who told me where he was, yowling at me from the top of the wardrobe. I looked around for the picnic blanket to carry him in, but couldn't find it. I reached up and took him off the wardrobe and held him tight, but then as I went out I had the presence of mind to snatch a blanket off the nearest bed. All the way back along the corridor I was wrapping Kaspar up in the blanket, not against the cold, but to stop him clawing at me, for I knew that even if he wasn't frightened now, he very soon would be. But as I ran back down the corridor, I was beginning to realise that the blanket had another use, and a much more essential one too. If no luggage was being allowed in the boats, I reasoned and hardly accept a cat. This was why, by the time I got back up on deck again, Kaspar was well hidden deep inside the blanket, and now he was beginning to yell. None of your fuss, please, Kaspar, I whispered to him. Quiet now and stay quiet. Your life depends on it. I pushed my way through the stokers, ducked under the cordon of crewmen, and saw to my great relief that the lifeboat was still hanging there. But then I found my way suddenly blocked by an officer in a peaked cap who'd grabbed me by the shoulder. No, you don't, lad. No men allowed in the boats until all the women and children are loaded, he said. I can't let you on. I can't let you pass. He's not a man, someone shouted from behind me. He's only a kid, can't you see? All around me the stokers were suddenly clamouring at him to let me through, and they began pushing angrily against the ring of sailors, desperately trying to hold them back. I could see the officer was taken by surprise, all at the sudden rage of the crowd, and then he was hesitating. I saw my chance. I'm not going on the boat, I told him. I just want to fetch a blanket. It's for a child, a friend of mine. She'll freeze to death out there with it. I still don't think it'd have let me through if Mr. Stanton hadn't come up at that moment and vouched for me. It's all right, he's my son, he said to the officer, and the blanket's for his sister. I was through. With Mr. Stanton holding me fast round the waist, I leaned across and handed the blanket and the miraculously silent Kaspar into Mrs. Stanton's outstretched arms. Be careful, I told her as meaningfully as I could. She knew as she was taking it from me that Kaspar was inside the blanket. She hugged it to her and sat down again in the boat. I could see from the way Elizabeth was smiling up at me that she knew it too. Distress rockets were fired up into the sky, lighting the ocean all around us, lighting too the scattering of little white boats out into the open sea, each of them crammed with children. I remember thinking how extraordinarily beautiful it all was, and wondering how something as terrible as this could be so beautiful. On board, behind us, the band played on. As Elizabeth's boat was finally lowered into the water, Mr. Stanton and I stood side by side and watched from the railings as it rowed slowly away. That was a fine and noble thing you did, Johnny, he said, putting his hand on my shoulder. God will guard them now, I know it. And for us, there'll be a boat here soon enough to take us off. Mr. Lightoller said they've seen the lights of a ship not 5 miles away, the Carpathia. She'll be on her way. They'll see the rockets for sure. They'll be along soon enough. Meanwhile, I think we should help with the women and children, don't you? That was how we busied ourselves for the next hour or so, passing the women and the children into boats. I marvel now, when I think of it, at the courage I witnessed around me that night. I saw one American lady waiting to get into a boat with her elderly sister, but she was told there was no room. She didn't object or protest in any way, but merely stepped back and said, Never mind, I will get on a later boat. I never saw her again. I saw no man ever try to push his way to the boats. To a man they accepted that it was perfectly right and proper for women and children to go first. I heard later that some men on the starboard side of the ship had tried to rush one of the lifeboats, and that shots had been fired over their heads to drive them back, but I never saw it with my own eyes. There were many heroes that night, but if there was one I remember it best was Mr. Lightoller. He was everywhere, quietly ensuring the safe loading and launching of the boats and picking out the seamen to row each one. I can hear his voice even now echoing in my head. "Lower away there! Lower away! Are there any more women? Are there any more women?" And one of the waiting men answered him back, I remember. "No more women, officer. There's plenty of men, though, but I don't see plenty of boats." It was something every one of us now had come to realise, that there were hardly any boats left to take the rest of us off, and that many of the lifeboats that remained couldn't be launched because of the severe list of the ship. When I saw the sea water coming washing over the bow and rushing down the deck towards us, I knew that our chances of survival were fading fast. Like so many others, I scanned the horizon desperately for the lights of the Carpathia. We were all aware by now that she was the only ship close enough to come to our rescue. But there was no lights to be seen. The Titanic was sinking fast, and we knew now we were going down with her. With every minute that passed now, the list to port was telling us the end was near. The deck was at such an angle that it would be well nigh impossible to keep our footing. We heard Mr. Lighttoller's voice ringing out, "All passengers to starboard side!" So that's where Mr. Stanton and I went, slipping and sliding, clutching at each other for support, until we reached the rail on the starboard side and clung on. Here we looked out to sea and waited silently for our end.